Have you ever wondered if God was really guiding you when everything seemed to be falling apart? Perhaps if authorities question your motives, or when doors slam shut and everyone thought you had lost your mind? Well, today I want to share how Saint John Bosco navigated crushing setbacks and government surveillance, all while receiving a prophetic dream that changed everything.
The Miracles and Prophecies of Saint John Bosco, a project of America Needs Fatima. I'm your host, Adrian Fonseca. Subscribe for new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Welcome to the Miracles and Prophecies of Saint John Bosco. I'm Adrian Fonseca. These videos exist to share timeless wisdom from Saint John Bosco that can transform your spiritual life and inspire you to grow closer to Christ and Our Lady. Here's what I want you to think about as we explore today's story. How do you recognize God's voice when everything around you is in chaos? This is the challenge that Don Bosco faced, and the challenge that we all face when God calls us to something bigger than ourselves. The story begins with hope. After months of hardship and turmoil, Don Bosco had just returned from a lengthy and stressful conversation at the city palace with the Marquis of Cavour, the powerful vicar of Turin, who held Don Bosco's future in his hands. He had convinced himself, perhaps a bit too optimistically, that he would finally find some peace. Time with his boys, laughter in the open fields, simple moments of ministry. But what awaited him was a letter, and it certainly wasn't a friendly one. It came from the Filippi brothers, the landowners of the meadow where Don Bosco had gathered his boys all year long. As he opened it, his heart sank. "Your boys, by constantly trampling on our lawn, will cause even the roots of the grass to be lost. We are happy to forgive you the overdue rent, provided that within 15 days you vacate the meadow." This was crushing. That field wasn't just some grass. It was their sanctuary, an innocent refuge for Turin's poorest and most forgotten young boys. And now, it was being taken from them. You might think that Don Bosco would see this as a persecution, perhaps a conspiracy to destroy his work. But he didn't. He believed that these were trials allowed by God, tests meant to purify the mission that was entrusted to him. So he went first to the Archbishop of Turin, hoping for advice or intervention. The Archbishop offered words of patience and courage. Then Don Bosco visited Count Colegno, a powerful ally who promised protection. But the real challenge was returning to the imposing office of Marquis Cavour, a man of power, prestige, and deep skepticism about Don Bosco's growing oratory. The Marquis set forth strict conditions: no large groups, no public walks, and absolutely no older boys. They were, in his words, the, quote, most dangerous. And he told Don Bosco, "But what do you care about these scoundrels? Leave them in their homes. Do not take responsibility for them." But Don Bosco couldn't do that. These older boys weren't scoundrels, they were souls. So he left without permission and without a clear path forward. The truth was, this wasn't just about a field. The Marquis had seen something unsettling. He observed that this small, unpretentious oratory could someday evolve into a powerful entity, capable of influencing people, and in the wrong hands, even threatening civil order. So, Big Brother began watching Don Bosco. On Sunday mornings, as early as 6 o'clock, city guards patrolled the meadows, following Don Bosco's boys, observing their movements, taking notes. This greatly amused the priest. Don Bosco laughed to see himself accompanied like a king by that honor guard. Despite constant challenges, our saint never wavered. Once he discovered God's will, he followed it to the end. Each resolution was formed through prayer, counsel, and often dreams. Yes, dreams. Don Bosco's dreams were vivid, sometimes unsettling, and almost always prophetic. One in particular stood out that's relevant to our story today. He saw a magnificent house, similar to one dedicated to St. Francis de Sales. He noticed that young men, clerics, and priests coming and going. On its pediment, he read the words, "This is my house. From here my glory shall shine." Then another vision appeared, the Panardi house, humble, modest, and completely unfit by earthly standards. And yet, the voice of God whispers, "Do you not know that the Lord can enrich his people with the spoils of the Egyptians?" There was more. 2 columns with the inscriptions, "This way and that way, my glory." On one side stands the Salesians, on the other is a sister congregation, the Daughters of Mary Help of Christians. This dream offered the first indication of the sister congregation that Don Bosco would establish alongside the Salesians. He hadn't spoken about this yet to anyone, but in his heart, something was quietly stirring. Don Bosco would ultimately pass through 3 stations before arriving at a stable home. The first was a refuge, the second at the city mills, and the third included Moretta House and the adjoining meadow. As he approached that third station, Don Bosco knew that he was getting closer to fulfilling his mission. From the refuge to the mills to Moretta, God was moving in and through Saint John Bosco. As I was preparing this story, I kept thinking about how relevant this is for all of us today. Don Bosco's experience shows us something powerful. God's voice often becomes clearest, not despite our difficulties, but because of them. Think about it. When have you heard God's direction most clearly? Usually it's during those times when human solutions aren't working, when doors are closing, and when people are questioning your judgment. That's exactly when God steps in with his bigger plan. This story has completely changed how I approach challenges in my own life. Instead of seeing obstacles as roadblocks, I'm learning to see them as God's way of redirecting me towards something better. What about you? Have you ever experienced God's guidance through what seemed like an impossible circumstance? I'd love to hear your story in the comment section down below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story resonated with you, would you share it with someone who might need to hear this story? That God has a plan for everyone, even in the chaos? Sometimes we're the instruments that God uses to deliver hope to others. Don Bosco's story reminds us that God's greatest missions often face the strongest resistance. However, the very opposition that seemed designed to stop Don Bosco was actually preparing him for something far greater than he could have imagined. Don Bosco's ability to find joy, even under government surveillance, and to see God's hand in every setback, offers us a powerful model for our own difficult moments. God's voice doesn't disappear during trials. In fact, it often becomes clearer. And speaking of incredible stories of divine guidance, I want you to watch another powerful episode right now. Click on the video appearing on your screen to discover why Don Bosco was called a madman for allowing children to play. In that episode, you'll see how Don Bosco received another prophetic dream from Our Lady during Christmas of 1845 that completely transformed his ministry, despite facing devastating disappointment and seemingly impossible obstacles. Thank you for joining me today. Saint John Bosco, pray for us, and may God bless you and Mary Immaculate keep you under her mantle. God love you.